Hey everyone, Robert here, author of Expansion Mastery, the practical guide to living a fully engaged life. Are you ready to start living your life to the fullest? Are you ready and willing to transform yourself and your life from ordinary to extraordinary? Then let's get to it, my friends. Welcome to the Fully Engaged Life. Welcome back to the show, everyone. In last week's episode, I addressed what I termed as practical mindfulness and how we can begin to build a foundation in mindfulness in a very practical way that touches our lives very deeply without undertaking the actual formal practices. And while all of those things that I discussed can greatly impact your life and help you to begin living a more positive, fully engaged life, I also pointed out that it is the actual practices that go much, much deeper into the mind and mental processes that then allow you to actually attain a state of mindfulness. And this is the true sense of mindfulness. So I would like to help you understand this. And the reason for this is because upon speaking of mindfulness a lot and teaching it to students and clients, I rather consistently have people trying to explain to me how they must have already attained mindfulness through this or that type of experience. I contend, however, that is nothing more than delusion, as particular practices are necessary to help elevate us out of a state of mindlessness and move into the light of true mindfulness. Now, sometimes some of these people are trapped in this unconscious mental cycle of trying very hard to convince themselves, as well as me, time and time again, that they somehow must already have attained the state of mindfulness. And this happens because they cannot comprehend what it actually is. And it's not really possible to have that comprehension until you engage successfully the practices, because it is going through those practices that offers you an understanding for what it actually is. But yet they continue time and again to give me yet another story, some example that they can bring up and probably exaggerate to some degree in their mind in order to make it seem as though they have attained this. Einstein has a theory about such behavior, doesn't he? Yet these people fail to recognize the cycle of desperation that they're actually in, which speaks to the fact that they have not yet attained mindfulness, because they lack the self-awareness for this type of cycle that their mind is in, as well as the means through which to escape from it, which mindfulness provides. And I have been engaged in these practices and studies for 40 years now, and I have searched the world over through countless cultures looking for another system that is either equally as effective or more effective than these particular mindfulness practices that I've been sharing with you. And I've been unable to find anything that even comes close. You see, the mindfulness I'm speaking of here, is not simply paying attention to something or being aware of something. It's actually a state of being that arises from accessing the unconscious mental processes of the subconscious mind, observing them with the conscious mind, and learning how they arise and fall, finding their root, and then actually engaging with a sense of purpose those mental processes one by one, and either fixing them, turning them from a negative process into a positive process, or dissolving them completely, which then neutralizes it. And this is important to understand, that if we look at mindfulness in the most simplistic, descriptive terms that we can try to convey in language, it is a state of being. It is not the mind paying attention to something. It's an actual state of being that we enter. And then we live in that state of being all the time. It's not only there within the practice, it becomes our natural state. And the practices help guide us into taking these mental processes that we are unconscious of, that are running in the background of the mind all the time, and these processes that are taking place in the subconscious mind, and we bring them out of the subconscious, whereby they're unconscious, and we bring them into our conscious mind where we can work with them. First, we observe them to understand how they work, to realize a truth that they are there, even though we never knew it, and then we engage them. When it comes to authentic mindfulness, there is no way around going through the process of these practices. And the reason for this is because we're all basically the same. When we are born, we begin to think, and it is that thinking that creates a sense of separateness, and it is through the thinking that we lose our original mental state, which includes this state of being, which is mindfulness. I cannot stress strongly enough the importance of developing authentic mindfulness. And that is the reason I am trying to make this as clear as I possibly can. But we have to keep in mind that we really can't comprehend what this is until we go through it. We can develop some sort of idea, a very, very simplistic level of understanding, but it isn't until you actually experience these practices and develop this state of mind that you truly come to understand it. And as I've explained in the past, the first step to developing mindfulness in the authentic practices is developing mindfulness of the body. So the first thing we do is we use our physical form. Why? Because we all have that physical form. And this consists of various practices which are meant to guide us into the easiest and most direct way of observing and engaging and overcoming the ignorance and delusion of the mind. So it couldn't be easier, it couldn't be a more natural process. We're going to use our physical body, and this is why I have stressed in the past how important it is to keep your body as healthy as possible, because the healthier your body is, the more successful you can be with these practices. We all have a body, and we all breathe. And those are the two things that are required in order to begin engaging the practices. That's all you need. Your physical body and your breath. No trinkets, no trappings, and you've got these things no matter where you go. So you can practice anywhere you happen to find yourself. So this really eliminates any excuse that you can come up with, because it doesn't cost you a single penny, and you've always got your body and your breath with you, so you can practice anytime, anywhere. So the very first practice in this sequence is to achieve a state of mindful breathing. Okay, this is the first step in attaining mindfulness. You have to work with your breath in a very mindful way. And in doing so, you're engaging the body, right? The breathing process, obviously, takes place within the body. So this is the first step in developing mindfulness of the body, is through the breath. That's not all there is. There are several more practices, and they get pretty deep. But this is where we begin. And I have gone over this process in previous podcasts, so you can look those up and go through the detailed teaching of this, again, for free. So you've got everything you need. You've got all of the equipment you need for free. You're getting the instruction for free. There is no excuse. Every external barrier has been removed, and the only thing that remains is, are you ready and are you willing to make the effort to engage these practices and attain the state of being known as mindfulness? Now, this is how I became so interested in mindfulness and understood its importance very early on. If you read my book or you know me, then you're well aware of the story when I was like 13, 14 years old and I choked to death on a red-hot jawbreaker. Going through that experience and losing the ability to breathe and actually being choked out and having everything stop, all of my breathing, everything stopped, having to be resuscitated and things, I understood the importance of breathing from a very young age. And through that experience, I became very, very aware of my breathing. I was ultra aware of my breathing for quite a while after that. Actually, it never really went away. It just shifted from one type of focus to another, but I was afraid I was going to stop breathing again. When I came back from the hospital that night after the incident, I was afraid to relax and go to sleep, afraid that my breathing would stop again. And of course, there was nothing to obstruct it, but that feeling was still there. And that carried on for a very long time. And because of that, even when I got into martial arts a few years later, the breathing aspect really appealed to me. So I was very ultra aware of my breathing after that incident. But does that mean that I had attained mindfulness of my breathing? I had attained a state of mindful breathing? No. Was I very aware of it? Was my attention on it a lot more than anybody else my age? Oh, most definitely it was. And see, this is the way that I'm explaining this idea of mindfulness. In the previous episode, I gave you some examples of practical mindfulness. And that would coincide with the level of awareness I had for my breathing after this death experience. But could that actually be considered as the state of mindfulness or mindful breathing? No. It's deeper than that. It's something far more than that. Because with that, I had the process of breathing taken away from me until the point of death, and then got it returned to me, luckily. So I was very aware of it, and I was so grateful for the breath. And it awakened me a little bit to how important the breath was, and how life could be gone in an instant and all of that. Oh yeah, certainly it did. That experience changed my life, but did it make me mindful? No, it did not. I had to go through the specific practices in order to attain that. From that experience, I became very hypersensitive to my breathing, and I would breathe more deeply and really enjoy it. And I was aware of how important the breathing was when I got into martial arts and began into spiritual practices as well. And that is what really piqued my interest in both of those things is how important the breath is. And yes, the breath is extremely important to doing martial arts correctly. It is also absolutely essential in any spiritual system and its formal practices. So then, even if an experience had made me very interested and aware of my breathing, I had not yet attained mindful breathing. No, I had to undergo the practices of that. And see, I had to go into my body and observe the process using my mind, my awareness, the observer. I had to observe the process taking place within my body. And then I had to understand how that breath was originating. What was making it work without me paying attention to it? I would breathe even if I was asleep or if I was unconscious. I would still breathe. So what was making that? I had to get in touch with that process. I had to find that process. And then I realized that when I was breathing through my chest, which most adults are doing, you're breathing through the chest using only like the top third or quarter of your lungs, which is not a healthy way to breathe. It's very labored, very forced. I realized that the natural way to breathe was diaphragmatic breathing. So I engaged in diaphragmatic breathing, and that is the first part of attaining mindfulness in the body. Working with the breath is to go into your body, go into your mind, understand the breathing process itself, and then observe how you were breathing. Realize that if you're breathing from the chest, that was not optimal, that we wanted to drop that down so our abdomen would rise and fall instead of our chest, and that's what's called diaphragmatic breathing or belly breathing. And then it is through the very specific process of the mindfulness practice of mindful breathing that we would be able to observe and then engage that process and then change it. So the act of breathing is one that is unconscious, right? We don't have to remain conscious of the fact we're breathing. We can trust in the fact that we will continue to breathe because the autonomic nervous system is overseeing that process. So the practice takes you in to where the process is taking place, and it allows you to observe it, and then it actually allows you to engage the process of breathing through the autonomic nervous system directly. And what we're going to do is you take that out of the subconscious and into your conscious mind, where you actively engage that process and you change it. You change it from labored, forced chest breathing, only using the top portion of your lungs, to abdominal breathing, belly breathing, or diaphragmatic breathing, where you're using your diaphragm far more efficiently than before. And then your stomach will start to rise and fall, and you will then enjoy the health benefits of that. And that is the way you were breathing when you were born. If you observe an infant or even a toddler, somebody up to 3, 4, even 5 years old, you will notice that their belly moves as they breathe instead of their chest. That's how we're supposed to continue to breathe. But with the development of the ego, that shifts. So what we're doing is shifting it back to where it should be. And over time, engaging in the process of the practice, what happens is this shift becomes permanent. Through interacting with your nervous system and the subconscious mind, bringing this process out of that area into the conscious mind where you can then work with it and practice it. Over time, usually takes 2 to 3 months at the longest if you're actually engaging the practices correctly. Then that becomes your natural form of breathing, and then you can allow that process to go back into the subconscious mind where you don't have to think about it anymore, and then you're just naturally always breathing with the diaphragm. So you're always doing this diaphragmatic breathing. And even if you're asleep, you're doing diaphragmatic breathing. And you allow that to go back into the subconscious mind where you don't have to pay attention to it anymore. It becomes an unconscious act as the autonomic nervous system has been reprogrammed to do this automatically. So you don't have to think about it. And this one practice alone is the absolute essential heart of everything in martial arts and spirituality. So you see the difference. When I was without my breath, and I became very aware of the breath, but I hadn't gone into my subconscious mind. I hadn't done anything to really engage and work with the breath process itself. I hadn't made any changes to it or anything. See, that's the difference. Authentic mindfulness practices take you more deeply and allow you to interact with these otherwise unconscious mental processes in order to make changes. Here's a very clear example of how you go in and make a change through a mindfulness practice, thereby making yourself far more mindful of your breath. And indeed, through that, you can then take it further to actually master the breath. The breathing mastery program that I've created is designed to do this for you, and it starts with this type of practice. It guides you through the breathing practices of mindfulness to allow you to attain mindful breathing. It gives you the ability to have a sense of conscious breathing. And just a word of caution here. Of course, you understand that you should not engage in any of these practices without the guidance of a skilled teacher. And one of the things that I enjoy and respect personally about these practices is that the first practice could not be a more natural place to begin. That's how we begin our life in this body and mind, is with that first breath when we are born. And we quickly come to realize that without that breath, we cease to be. Okay, so now we know that we can't just stumble upon mindfulness. The state of being doesn't just happen without a specific process in place, namely all of the practices. So we can't just make something up and believe it's mindfulness, because it isn't. And even if we have some sort of extreme experience that makes us ultra aware of something, that still is not mindfulness. Mindfulness is only attained through specific practices in a specific order, and succeeding with those practices, and some of which get very, very deep into how the mind works in ways that we don't even realize are there. And we don't even realize that they're taking place nearly every moment of every day. And it is through the practices that we are given access to these mental processes that allow us to engage them directly. And it is through these practices and the attainment of the state of being that can lead us into the state of being known as being awakened. So this is how it all begins, by achieving a state of mindful breathing. And it is through this mindful breathing that gives you the first step in developing the mindfulness of the body. And as you go through each step in the process, you become a little more mindful and a little more mindful and a little more mindful. It's always enjoyable for me when guiding a student or client through this process, because they're always a little unsure in the beginning, and yet they're excited to do it, but they don't really know what to expect. They have some preconceived ideas, of course, which they will actually have to overcome along the way. They will lose that through working with that process too. But then once they go through the whole thing and they've done so successfully, it's very interesting to hear what they say. For instance, I have a martial arts student who went through this process, and it took him 2 or 3 years to go through all of it. And on the other side, he asked me one day, he said, is my perception correct in relating this to what I'm doing with martial arts, that I don't feel I would be capable of understanding the level of which you are teaching right now, nor would I be able to do the things that we are doing right now if it were not for the actual attainment of mindfulness. And I agree with him, absolutely. Mindfulness unlocks the door to many, many things. And it is at the very core of transforming you and your life from ordinary, which is mindlessness, to extraordinary, which is mindfulness. So please be mindful and visit me at www.expansionmastery.com. Get your autographed copy of Expansion Mastery there, as well as some other goodies. And hopefully soon I will be releasing the Breathing Mastery program, which will give you all of the practices and some in order to develop mindful breathing. And please make sure that you are sharing these podcasts, get this information out to others. And I always appreciate the courtesy act of all of the subscribes and likes and comments and shares and all the other things you do on social media to show your continued support, which is incredibly appreciated. Until next time, my friends, I wish you the very best in your practices and your life. Take care.